Hi, my name is Manny Goldman, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Sacred Plant Company. Thank you for being here and for being you. It takes an extraordinary person to search for solutions beyond the conventional medical model. You've come to the right place, and I promise you that you'll be blown away by what you'll learn and discover in this series over the next 7 days. Our mission here at the Sacred Plant Company is to educate and empower billions of people worldwide to be happy, healthy, and pain-free with nature's most healing plant, which I've codenamed the Sacred Plant. This information has been hidden from you, me, and everyone around the world for decades, and that stops today. By the end of this episode, you will discover what the Sacred Plant is, why it's been a secret, and how it's been used to prevent, treat, and even beat the most devastating health conditions. There are so many people needlessly suffering right now, some of which are the people we care about most. Together we can help them. Please watch this entire series and invite your loved ones to watch it with you for free. Thank you so much. I'll let your amazing host, John Malanca, take it from here, and I'll be back for a surprise appearance to host a future episode. See you soon. Enjoy.
If I was to describe the plant, the most apt description I've ever heard of it was that it's a pharmacological treasure trove. We have barely scratched the surface of the plant.
I had a certain amount of skepticism, but the more that I've been doing this, the more impressed I've been with the enormous range of conditions that can be treated and how effective it is for many people.
Our public-funded research has come to recognize so many values of the materials of this plant. In 800-size patient trials going on in multiple sites, that data is there.
This has been around for thousands of years, and I think that a lot of people don't realize that.
I have a lot of MS patients getting out of wheelchairs, and it's on and on and on and on.
So went and got the needle biopsy, and sure enough, there was cancer cells in the lymph node. It's starting to go away. The doctor, he can't believe it. All the doctors, they've all said the same thing. We don't know that much about it, but don't stop. If it's working, don't stop.
Over the years, we tried close to 12 medications, including morphine, just to knock her out because nothing helped. From the first few drops, the seizure just stopped. I was like, wow. It was like pulling the plug out of the wall. It was just not there anymore.
Our world will change. I think the world will change if people would be able to have it.
If I would have had this as a medicine, known how to use it as a medicine the way I do today, when I first started playing the game of football, I could have, in my opinion, defeated everything that has interrupted and interfered with my career.
It can be a preventative for all kinds of conditions. Alzheimer's, arthritis. If you have cancer that runs in your family.
And I got my scan report back and I had 20% shrinkage of my tumors from this tincture.
God said to begin with, he put all the medicinal plants on earth to help us, so it was just a matter of finding the right one.
I didn't need to be persuaded or convinced that this is something that is going to make even a revolution in medicine.
So this is why we fight, and this is why we try to make change, because there's so many other people who don't have this knowledge and who have, the medicine is accessible to them, but a lot of them are maybe afraid, or it's something new and it's something different, and the stigma.
I'm risking jail in order to save my life.
Number one, I'm a firm believer in it. Number two, it's something that needs to get out to the world. It needs to get out to the world.
Hello and welcome to the Sacred Plant Healing Secrets Exposed. I'm your host, John Malanca, and over the next 7 episodes, I'll guide you through an educational journey that shows you how this sacred plant interacts with our immune systems and aids in the treatment of many diseases. You're likely wondering why we haven't yet told you what the sacred plant is, but I promise by the end of this episode, you'll know exactly what the sacred plant is and why we had to keep it a secret. In the first episode, The Sacred Plant Revealed, you'll hear medical experts, patients, and scientists describe one of the most healing plants on earth. The information we're about to share could ease the suffering of millions of people. It could also change your life, as it has mine. 7 years ago, my wife Corinne and I learned that her father was terminally ill. I was crushed. I could not accept that Western medicine had nothing left to offer to him. I searched for anything to give us hope. I was praying that the sacred plant would give my father-in-law some comfort in his final days. What I never expected is that it would actually save his life. After experiencing this miracle, Corinne and I founded a nonprofit organization devoted to helping patients access this natural and healing medicine. So when the founder of the Sacred Plant asked me to host this series, I knew it would be a perfect fit with our goal of sharing this vital information with a wider audience. The Sacred Plant's mission is to expose the truth about this ancient medicine that has been used by civilizations for over 5,000 years. The gifts of this amazing plant have been covered up by propaganda and lies in the media, and sadly, even by our own government. As you watch this breakthrough series, you'll discover that this plant works miracles on many conditions, including cancer, chronic pain, epilepsy, autoimmune diseases like arthritis and MS, and much more. These diseases are normally treated with expensive pharmaceuticals that have devastating side effects. But as we will show you, these conditions have been found to go into remission when treated with this God-given plant. Why is that? What is the secret of this plant? And why is it so effective for so many diseases? It sounds too incredible to be true, but we will prove it to you. Let's hear from some of our featured experts on why they support the sacred plant.
We do currently have a healthcare crisis in the United States. The crisis has arisen because of the fact that the drugs don't treat the root cause of the problem. They treat a symptom, they mask a symptom. And the problem with pharmaceutical drugs is that they'll create more symptoms that then later they can produce another drug to treat. It's another Band-Aid, but that creates more symptoms. So it's this perpetual endless cycle that we have today of treating symptoms with pharmaceutical drugs, but we never get to the root cause. And that's where the sacred plant comes in, is because this can actually go to the root cause of some of the symptoms that we're seeing and eliminate them.
This is a plant that has been part of ethnobotanical practices throughout human history, because the plant has co-evolved with humanity as we have been here and our ancestors have been here. We've used the plant and its constituents as medicine. We've used it ritualistically. We've used it even as food sources, rich in healthy oils, healthy seeds, and so on. It's only relatively recently that there has been prohibition against this natural plant.
My wife and I did not hear about the sacred plant from our doctors. We heard about this plant from our own research, just like you're doing now. I don't think there's anything like watching a loved one suffer. It's hell. My wife had to watch her father, her hero as a child, and still to this day, suffer. No one should experience anything like that when help is within reach. It's here. Later in this episode, I will share our story, and it may sound like a miracle, but when we explain how the sacred plant works on receptor sites within our bodies, you'll understand that this is a science of miracles.
This uniquely sacred plant has actually receptors in our body that have been hardwired over eons of time to access these compounds and utilize them to balance out our system. So it's unique among all of the thousands of natural substances that cultures have used to heal themselves.
In my science lab, we've looked at a lot of different botanicals, a lot of healing medicines. When we look at the sacred plant, we find that it has the most astonishing healing molecules that Mother Nature has found ways to rearrange using the same elements, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They're just rearranged differently. So the sacred plant is sort of a recoding of the information system of Mother Nature that's compatible with your body and your mind. It's like high-level software that is actually programming you to heal. And it's put on this earth, I believe, as a sacred plant to accomplish this for humanity. We are supposed to be awake, aware, alive, healthy. We're supposed to have access to medicine. It's supposed to be open source, and it's supposed to be made of the simplest elements in the universe, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And that's what we find throughout this sacred plant.
As a Christian, I used to be a huge skeptic. I was taught to believe that using this plant was an act against God. But I was wrong about the moral objection I had against this healing medicine. Now I understand the true medical potential of this sacred plant and how it could threaten the multi-billion-dollar market for pharmaceutical prescriptions.
Our modern medical system, which they call evidence-based medicine, is really truly patent-based, profit-based medicine, because they're only interested in drugs and therapies that can be patented that will generate high profits. So the industry turns a blind eye to anything that's natural and to anything that's non-toxic.
The primary reason why this sacred plant is not a household remedy is because it was a threat to the advent of patented chemical medicines. It was in the 30s that you would see in pharmacies around this country this plant as a primary intervention for a wide range of complaints. But it was also around that time that the pharmaceutical industry started to co-opt medicine and really just push out any non-patentable substance. That excluded almost all plants. So being that this sacred plant had been used for at least 10,000 years, the historical record shows, it was a primary threat. So politically, they basically ousted it, criminalized access to it, and only now are we seeing the science supporting what the ancients always knew to be true, which it is the most powerful healing agent that I know of.
There have been recorded over 500 compounds to be found on this plant. We've only really investigated a half a dozen of them thoroughly, and we don't even understand how some of them work, yet they're effective, they're non-toxic. You know, if it was discovered on a mountaintop today or brought into a lab today, it would be coveted as a wonder drug.
There is so much medical potential in this plant, from an anti-inflammatory to sleep aid. I have seen patients in total reversal of their autoimmune condition, whether it's fibromyalgia, lupus, Lyme disease, autism, epilepsy.
It's really hard to believe that one medicine could possibly treat this many different conditions and different body systems. And even as a physician and scientist, I had trouble swallowing that pill. Like, is this a snake oil? Is this really possible that one plant could do so much?
Just like Dr. Sulak, I also believe you will be amazed when we show you the healing powers of the sacred plant. We've gathered some of the world's leading scientists, doctors, and researchers in the field to share their findings with you. The truth is, we are all going to watch people we love get hit with chronic diseases. Cancer is taking more lives today than ever before. A shocking 1 in 3 women and 1 in 2 men will get cancer in their lifetime. 1 in 3 seniors are dying with Alzheimer's. Autoimmune diseases is on the rise all around the world, with over 70 million Americans alone facing debilitating and life-shattering symptoms of arthritis and multiple sclerosis. Over 1 billion people worldwide are in chronic pain every day, and the pain medications may be inflicting irreparable damage. We all need the tools to prevent, treat, and even beat these illnesses. This is why I'm giving this to you as a gift. Please tell your friends and family to watch this series. The information is of vital importance. Let's meet Amber Lyon. Amber is a former CNN journalist who used plant medicine to survive her harrowing journey with PTSD.
I was over there filming a documentary on these protesters who were fighting for democracy in Bahrain. And as we're heading out of one of the human rights activists' homes, all of a sudden, it was the oh no moment, because I look up and I see a helicopter flying above us, and all of these men wearing these black masks, carrying these big machine guns, started coming at us with their guns pointed at us. I get on the ground and I have my hands up in the air and my head's just on the ground. I have my ID in my hand and I'm just screaming, CNN, CNN, don't shoot, don't shoot. Each breath I was taking, I felt like I was sucking in a lot of dust. We were on the ground, I had dust in my face, dust in my throat, but I didn't care because I literally thought each breath would be my last. And I'm just waiting for the gunshot to go off. And luckily it never did. And we were taken to a prison and questioned, and then the State Department helped us get out and we were released about 9 hours later. Slowly, over 10 years, I'd absorbed so much pain that I started to develop symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that was really horrific. I went from this picture-perfect lifestyle, this stoic, really successful woman, to all of a sudden almost like a child. I couldn't sleep. I had problems eating. My mind was always racing. Constantly, I was in the fight or flight mode. So if a door would slam or I'd hear a helicopter, all of a sudden my pulse would start just racing and I'd feel like I was gonna pass out. And it got to the point where I couldn't write anymore. And so at that point, I knew I needed help. I was thinking about potentially trying prescription medications because the symptoms had gotten so bad. But as a journalist, I'd spent 10 years on the streets covering the nation's drug epidemic, and I started to notice in my career that illegal street drugs were being replaced with legal prescription medications. And I witnessed a woman shooting up a Xanax, which is one of the main treatments for PTSD, literally putting it in a bottle cap and shooting it up as you would heroin. So when it came time to my own healing, I wanted nothing to do with those medicines. I didn't care. At that point, I'd rather die. I didn't want to put them in my body. And that's when I started researching plant medicines. A friend of mine, Joe Rogan, I'd been on his podcast and he told me how they were some of the most amazing compounds known to the brain. And I started laughing at him. And he looked at me and he said, "You're the journalist. I can't believe you don't know about all the research and all the science that's been done about all these plant medicines." And I felt really embarrassed at that point that I didn't know about the medicinal benefits. So I went home and I started researching. And I literally had to clean my jaw up off the keyboard. I said, "What? How come I haven't had this information? How come I've been told the opposite, that these were harmful for me when they're really helpful?"
Amber was able to treat her own PTSD using plant medicine and is now educating others on the power of plants to heal. We will hear more stories about how the sacred plant treats PTSD and anxiety in episode 2. I'm constantly amazed at this plant's ability to heal. Here are a few of the people that you'll meet over the next 7 episodes. After you hear their stories, you'll understand why finding out about the sacred plant changed their lives.
A few weeks ago, I was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease, and I originally took the Vicodin that they gave me, and everyone around me hated me because it altered my personality so much.
A year ago this month, I was diagnosed with pre-onset Alzheimer's and dementia. I was contemplating suicide daily, having depressive thoughts, homicidal thoughts, and rage and depression that was just completely out of control.
When I was 16, they found that I had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. I was in pain all the time, taking methadone, morphine, at one point more than 40 medications on a daily basis.
The pregnancy was going fine. When he came out, he was basically gray, non-responsive.
We took him to emergency room, and after a couple of hours, he started having seizures. They had an MRI, and they found very widespread damage in his different parts of his brain.
He said he had never seen a diagnosis like this before. He had never had to tell somebody this news. It was in my liver and my lymph nodes. They couldn't even tell me how many tumors. It's innumerable tumors.
Went back to the MRI place and he said, there's a very large lemon or larger sized tumor in your right parietal lobe.
I've got metastases in my brain, and they will grow and they will eventually kill me. So I'm interested in anything over and above the normal treatment that can help.
I imagine some of you have already guessed that the sacred plant is Cannabis sativa. The cannabis plant dates back thousands of years as one of the oldest medicines known to mankind, but most of us have been misled that it's a dangerous drug instead of a healing medicine. Many patients won't even consider researching cannabis or trying it because it's against their moral values. Many others believe that using this plant is against their religion. I too held those beliefs until I understood the cannabis plant is a gift from the Creator to ease our suffering and heal our bodies.
I believe ancient cultures knew in their DNA that this plant was sacred because it has a profound set of benefits at helping to alleviate human suffering. So when people think about cannabis as some kind of vile, psychoactive weed that people are using to abuse themselves, they're not getting the fact that it grows wild and freely, and it was basically a gift from the Creator for us to be able to heal ourselves.
To those who say that cannabis is against their religion, well, that makes no sense, because if you believe in God, then you believe that God put the plants here to be biocompatible with us who were created in the image of God. How can God have created us and not have created cannabis? Clearly, if you believe that God created the natural world or even had an influence in it, then God created both.
In Genesis 1:29, it talks about how, God gave us all of the trees bearing fruit and the herbs with seeds and all of these natural plants for food and even for medicine. But there's Old Testament scholars that believe that, and New Testament scholars that believe that some of the anointing oils that were used in the Bible had cannabis oil in them, had the plant. There's even some that believe that some of the anointing that Jesus did was with cannabis. I don't believe that God put anything here on earth that doesn't have some sort of medicinal value. Prior to 1937, cannabis oil was used in almost every pharmacy. It was available over the counter. Medical doctors up to that time, they used cannabis to treat a whole variety of different ailments. What happened in 1937 is that what's called the Marijuana Tax Act was passed. And interesting about marijuana is just a term that the DEA put into the American consciousness. They took the two most popular Hispanic names, Mary and Juan, and they put them together and they called it marijuana. And so when the Marijuana Tax Act was passed in 1937, which effectively made it illegal, the American Medical Association didn't protest against this tax because they didn't know what marijuana was, right? It was a term that we'd never used in the United States. No one knew what marijuana was, but the AMA knew what cannabis was. They knew it was a very healing plant. But there was a Dr. Woodward that was a medical doctor and an attorney for the American Medical Association. He testified after the fact that if the AMA had known that marijuana was actually cannabis, they would have protested this act that effectively made it illegal.
Cannabis is a fascinating topic. I grew up taught that marijuana was an illegal drug, right? That it was a gateway drug, and it was demonized on TV ads and talks given at my school. But when I got to be in high school and even in college, I actually started researching on my own, and I learned that cannabis is one of the most versatile plants on earth. Not only as a textile, but it has incredible nutritional value. And then in recent years, we've just seen all of these testimonials start to percolate up from people who've healed with cannabis. And my thinking about the plant changed completely.
There's so much misinformation about this plant. I was the most guilty of assuming that this plant is only recreational and only utilized by those wanting to get high. And this couldn't be further from the truth. I learned this through my path with my family member and have found through my own study that there is so much medical information behind this plant. It's an anti-inflammatory. I could go on. The list goes on and on and on. But connecting the plant to the recreational use only, it couldn't be further from the truth. It's very medical.
It's troubling to me to see that we're still being misled about this plant. People don't realize that one of the first Model Ts that Henry Ford developed was made from hemp fiber, and it ran on hemp fuel. People don't realize that one of the first versions of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution was actually drafted on hemp paper. People don't realize that in the colony of Virginia between 1683, I think, and the early 1700s, you could literally pay your taxes with hemp. And for a while, you were required to grow it. You were required to grow it because it was such a beneficial crop. People don't realize that all the founding fathers had farms that grew hemp. So all this is history that's been hidden from us. And we're not taught this. All we're taught is that it's an evil weed, but we're not taught about the medicinal uses for it. We're not taught that cannabis is actually an amazingly powerful superfood. That's why this docuseries that you're doing is so important, because it's going to make people aware that there's more than just one use for this plant.
This plant actually represents one of the greatest threats to the medical industrial establishment because it actually has hundreds of health benefits, each of which competes with a pharmaceutical that is generally producing millions, if not billions of dollars annually. So when you have a plant that grows freely as if a weed, in your backyard, threatening a $1 trillion plus industry, you're going to see an irrational response, which is presently the vilification and even criminalization of its possession and use as a healing agent.
We don't really, and maybe we'll never know the ancestral condition of the cannabis plant. But the cannabis plant has absolutely clearly evolved under the influence of humankind. It evolved out of those steppes of Central Asia and migrated around the globe because it was cherished by human beings. It's relatively new. I mean, the use of cannabis as medicine is quite old, but as a modern science, it's really lagged behind.
As I shared with you early in this episode, my father-in-law, Stan Rutner, was given a terminal cancer diagnosis. My wife, Corinne, and I were lucky enough to live in a medically legal state and had the opportunity to try cannabis for his cancer.
We were out to dinner in February of 2011, and Stan got a phone call from his primary physician who said, it's cancer, stage 3B lung cancer. And, you just gulp and go on from there. But, after that, in April, he finished all of his radiation and chemotherapy by April.
10 days later, he started slurring his words, and we were afraid that he had had a stroke. And they brought him back in and did a brain scan and saw that he had a brain tumor on the brain stem. And of course, then the doctor's suggestion is to go straight back in for full brain radiation, which he did. And my dad was sent home on hospice care. They said there's nothing more they could do but give him prednisone. He was wasting and on full-time oxygen and literally withering away before our eyes. So thankfully, John had the wherewithal to ask the oncologist about medical cannabis, because we had stumbled on a statistic that said 40% of cancer patients pass of malnutrition before they pass of their cancer. And we thought, okay, if Dad could eat and drink fluids, he could pass peacefully. And that was all we were looking for, was some comfort so he wouldn't suffer.
Corinne and I went into panic education mode, and we went and obtained some coconut oil capsule, which was infused with raw and heated cannabis. There was no guidance, no direction, no help. So we gave him about 3 to 4 milligrams of this coconut oil.
Once a day.
Once a day. And within 24 hours he was eating. We accomplished our goal that we wanted him to eat, up his appetite, his complexion came back, his mood came back. Within 8 days, he was off his oxygen. And I remember going over to their home and seeing him shuffling around the room. I said, well, don't get too excited here. And he said, well, something's working. And so we thought, fantastic. And his life kept on improving. He started driving again.
Yeah.
He started getting out of the house.
I think he even rode a bike.
Which I do remember that. He rode a bike, and I believe he even swung a golf club a few times as well.
I think so.
And at the 6-month mark, hospice actually fired him as a patient because he was coming over once a week to play cards with Stan, and
They had no idea where they were coming anymore. He was living what looked like a very normal life. So we did get cannabis oil at the 6-month mark and gave him a very minute amount. We didn't know how much we were on the right track, but we instinctively gave him a microdose of cannabis oil, a tiny drop about the size of a sesame seed under his tongue before bed. He never changed from that. That's all he ever took. And at the 9-month mark, there was a report from the oncologist, and my dad was never going to be scanned again because he knew he was terminal. He was just going to enjoy life. But apparently he went behind our backs and got scanned, and the report read no evidence of recurrent disease. So he was cancer-free after 9 months of cannabis treatment, and that was over 6 years ago, and he's 84 now.
Brain cells keep regenerating. It's just wonderful. He exercises every day, or almost every day, doing lunges and squats, and his doctor, his primary physician, has said that, or it was your oncologist, I guess, has said he had a 1% chance of being where he is today. Yeah, it was that.
But I remember that night when your mother shared with us, you guys have saved your father's life, and that's...
It's big for John because he lost his father shortly before that.
So that alone is something that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. I mean, that is a gift, and We have a great life now with my father-in-law. He's 84 and a half, and we count all half birthdays. But he's living life again. He's been given a second chance of life, and he's loving every minute of it. One of the most exciting areas in cannabis research is looking at the anti-cancer properties of the plant. In episode number 4, we will explain the science behind how the plant works against cancer. Now let's meet Patricia Crone, a scholar at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, New Jersey. Patricia has been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and we will continue to follow Patricia's journey throughout our 7-episode series as she researches and seeks out medical cannabis to save her own life.
Oh, my name is Patricia Crone, and I have terminal lung cancer, which is not a very good type of cancer to have. And I got metastases in my brain, and they will grow and they will eventually kill me. So I am interested in anything over and above the normal treatment that can help.
And this is where marijuana comes in. I wanted not to get high, but to get well.
Chemotherapy was terrible, undilutedly terrible. Now, voila. They cut out a third of my lung and a lot of lymph nodes. Then I had another scan, MRI. Every time I have one, I get more nervous about the result. It showed that I had more metastases in my brain. It was very depressing, and they condemned me to whole brain radiation. And at that point, it became death, became very, very real and very, very close. It was a real, they never gave me any date, but it was very clear from their reaction. I could tell the way they've written me off. I am a professor of Islamic history at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton.
This place is as close to an ivory tower as it gets. If any of my colleagues here get high, it's more likely to be on ideas and pure research than on pot. Now we are in my office, my grand, beautiful office. I've had a lot of fun sitting around that table, struggling with text, text in difficult languages. It's good fun. With whole brain radiation, I would not be able to work the way I do. I wouldn't feel as well as I do. So what would I do if I couldn't work? Indeed, what is left? So I began to think harder about cannabis.
Hemp oil I produce comes from indica strain. Place the starting material, preferably good bud, in a plastic container. Dampen the bud material in the container with the solvent you are using. Generally, a pound of good hemp will produce about 2 ounces of high-grade oil.
That's a lot of...
Ingesting this amount of oil over a 2 to 3 month period.
I went up to my sister, who has a summer house in upstate New York, and we started looking for cannabis. There was that or whole brain radiation. I was desperate to get Rick's oil or a pound of cannabis to make it, but only Oregon accepted out-of-state applications. 355. Yeah, hello. I got your number from the alternative clinic in Portland. I'm looking for a grower in Oregon, a person to grow cannabis for me that I need for medical purposes.
Not sure there's anything we can do.
They said would be able to get me in contact with a potential grower.
We don't provide growers like that. We don't really put people together as such.
And you can't give me any sort of contact number or anything?
We just don't have any. It's not something we do. So very good luck, ma'am.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye. You really begin going into that panic state.
There are so many patients like Patricia who don't know where to find medical cannabis or even where to start. They endure the devastating side effects of chemo and radiation without any holistic alternatives. In episode number 5 and 6, we will cover recommended formulations and dosing for cancer patients. But first, let's meet our experts featured in this series and learn how they got interested in studying cannabis. Just like me, Many of them had previously been highly skeptical.
Now, I must say, when I saw a front page article on High Times in about 1975 with a long list of conditions that cannabis would be useful for, and then I thought these people are just using this as a propaganda tool. Well, every one of the 25 conditions that they had on the front page of High Times that I thought they were pulling my leg, I've turned out to have people who are patients of mine that I've treated.
You know, I got very lucky with the medication that I found now. It's the perfect strain for me.
I trained at UCLA pretty much all the way through in straight blood and guts internal medicine. For 35 years, I've been doing this medicine shtick. And for every other patient in every other chair, under every other situation, it's not only okay, it's absolutely expected that I tell them everything I think. Now, I could be wrong with my best judgment. That's why people come to anybody to get their best judgment. That's what the Hippocratic Oath clearly tells us, that the physician is to take care of the patient without regard to his benefit or loss in the end. I mean, yeah, people say I'm a cannabis physician, but I'm an internist who's now added some very useful tools to my toolbox.
I'm very curious about the antimicrobial and anti-infection properties of cannabis. So we're living in an era now of antibiotic resistance and an era of chronic infection.
So first of all, the osteopathic tradition has a history of looking for new solutions to prevalent problems in healthcare and really digging into the physiology and the anatomy of the body and realizing the most basic premise that healing comes from within, that we have this incredible inner pharmacy, and how can we stimulate that inner pharmacy to have the healthcare solutions rather than just suppressing symptoms with drugs, which is kind of the current treatment model in medicine. So we had a background and understanding of the endocannabinoid system and recognized that this is an integral part of health and healing. And then after residency, when I started my private practice in Maine in 2009, we were basically in the right place at the right time. That was right when a law had passed that expanded Maine's medical cannabis program. And at that time, suddenly there was only one other physician in the state that was willing to certify, and now we had hundreds of patients at our door that were looking to use this medicine. And we were just blown away by the things we were seeing.
One of the most common diagnoses that qualifies in Maine is for chronic pain. That's probably our most common diagnosis. I think second most common is PTSD, about 17% of our patients. And then we have a whole gamut of rare neurological conditions, of inflammatory conditions like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease.
Neurological conditions like MS, spasticity from spinal cord injuries or brain injuries. We see inflammatory conditions. Now, cannabis isn't just one medicine. It's not just like a one-size-fits-all, you're gonna use cannabis and you're gonna get better. Within this plant, there's so many different compounds that we're just starting to learn more and more about. The effective dosing range is incredibly broad and safe, and the side effect profile is pretty mild, especially compared to a lot of the alternatives. Cannabis is non-toxic at any dose. So even if one of my patients, say a pediatric patient, accidentally took 1,000 times the recommended dose, no brain damage, no organ damage, no toxicity. It can seem too good to be true, but this is really what we've been waiting for. This is a solution to our biggest challenges in healthcare right now. People are getting excited about it. I'm so glad that there's so much interest in the industry to continue to innovate and put this medicine in the hands of people.
How is it that the endocannabinoids have such a diverse effect on synaptic transmission? I'm a neuroscientist, so I study cellular and molecular neuroscience, physiology. You know, I come into this field as really a drug addiction researcher. I got funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. I've been a drug abuse researcher, and that's where so much of this has come from, because there's been such institutional bias, a pernicious kind of institutional bias towards researching cannabis to figure out why it's wrong. And even with that bias in place, out of that is the discovery of the endocannabinoid system. And I was kind of in the right place in the right time to be privy to some of the early discoveries of endocannabinoids. When I started getting into this field in the mid-90s, that's how young it is, mid-90s, I'm going into the field and going to neuroscience meetings and saying, But have you looked into the endocannabinoid system? Because cannabinoid receptors are in this brain area you're looking at. They mediate plasticity. Maybe it would be something to look at with your particular study, like Tourette syndrome. And the response I would get, and others in my field would get, was usually along the lines of, well, I don't study addiction. I don't study marijuana. I'm not interested in drug abuse, whatever.
Well, for the first 5 years, 4.5, 5 years that I was using cannabis as a tool in my internal medicine practice, I mean, there was no alternatives other than to tell them about different strain types and gross generalities, sativas for daytime, indicas for nighttime. And by the way, the reason they're named those are 3,000-year-old Sanskrit terms that mean daytime and nighttime. They made it very easy for us. But everything's been crossed a million times, and you can get very high THC sativas that agitate people where you used to think it was indicas, and it comes ultimately down to the chemistry.
Next, let's meet Kristen, a woman who at one time was so ill, she took 40 different medications to treat all of her various conditions. Let's see what happened when Kristen moved to Northern California to try using the sacred plant.
As a kid, I'd always been sick. When I was 16, they found that I had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. When I was 19, I was diagnosed with interstitial cystitis and endometriosis. And I got so bad that I was bedridden for about 4 years and had to self-catheterize for the bladder disease and had 14 surgeries. I was in pain all the time, taking methadone, morphine, at one point more than 40 medications on a daily basis to control the side effects of one medication. And I decided to try and go off of most of the medications and see if I could find, something that would control it more naturally before the medications started killing me. A lot of patients with lupus, most of them die from heart problems from the medications. I had noticed that times that I had the most pain and I would use cannabis to control that, I was able to get off of antibiotics. And I was on antibiotics for almost 7 years straight. So I started to study cannabis on my own, and I came across the endogenous cannabinoid system. And to me, it made sense that all of the conditions that I had weren't unrelated, that they were all stemming from the same problem, my body's inability to communicate with itself. So I was living in Chicago, and it's completely illegal there. So I just dropped everything and moved to California. And I had been using cannabis in the psychoactive form because I didn't know about the non-psychoactive. We started juicing the plant, and within about a month, you could see on the blood work that the lupus and RA had gone into remission. And so we kept juicing after that, and the only times that I've had significant problems is when we've traveled or we've had an interruption in being able to use the juice.
As your host, I want to take a minute to check in and ask if you're enjoying the first episode so far. I hope you're learning a lot of vital information and are excited to watch our next 6 episodes. Do you know someone who would benefit from this series? Is there one or more people in your life that come to mind who are suffering right now, who need hope and a new solution to their health challenges? Please share this series with them and everyone you care about on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites by clicking the links below. Your support will make a huge difference in how many people we reach and ultimately how many lives are saved. Thanks in advance for clicking the links below to share this information with those you care about most.
My family was very concerned with everything going wrong with me, that coming out here was gonna be a terrible problem. They're very conservative and live in the Midwest where it's not legal at all. And now my mom is our receptionist, and she'll call and she'll say, you have to save this person, and she's just made a complete turnaround. It can be a preventative for all kinds of conditions, Alzheimer's, arthritis. If you have cancer that runs in your family, there's a lot of evidence out there that regular juicing is such a strong antioxidant that it'll prevent all kinds of diseases. The different cannabinoids are good for different problems. Like CBN is one that you don't even hear much about, and that is antibacterial. There's over 80 different ingredients in the cannabis plant, just most of them have been bred out. So we're trying to reintroduce strains with the original cannabinoids and look at which cannabinoid is good for which condition. So in the future, maybe people would be able to have a plant specifically tailored for each of their medical problems. It's non-psychoactive for one thing, which means that there's no high associated and the fetus won't feel anything. And their pediatrician is aware that they get juice and that I did it in pregnancy. And they're both extremely smart, healthy. And I have an obstetrician, and I've consulted at UCSF with the high-risk obstetricians there, and they've agreed that because of my immune system and the different conditions that I have, the drugs that would normally be used to control that in pregnancy are very risky, or at least potentially have some risk, while this we know controls my immune system and doesn't have any known side effects. And I feel like if I can use this instead of that, I feel like it's a safer choice for my child.
Kristen realized that many of her conditions had a common cause. They were all linked to the endocannabinoid system, which we will cover in greater detail in episode 2. Once Kristen ingested phytocannabinoids from the cannabis plant, her immune system was able to function properly and her disease went into remission. Same phenomenon has happened to people all over the world. In this series, we'll meet many more success stories just like Kristen. People whose health deteriorated while they were fed a steady stream of pharmaceutical drugs until the sacred plant turned everything around for them. Unfortunately, many patients are not able to legally grow their own cannabis and are unable to access the plant in any form. Many patients read about the benefits of cannabis, but then struggle to find a way to acquire the plant. This is a heartbreaking situation which we will expose in episode 5. Now let's hear more from our experts on the cannabinoids in the plant and how they interact with our bodies on a cellular level.
So the endocannabinoid system is a real physiologic system that was discovered over 20 years ago. And if you do a PubMed search for the number of peer-reviewed scientific articles that have been published that describe the system, there's been an average of 1 article every other day for the last 20 years. Thousands of articles. This is a well-established understanding of both human and animal physiology.
The herb makes a resin like trees make sap. And this particular cannabis sativa plant that's 37 million years old produces a resin which makes phytocannabinoids, plant cannabinoids that just so happen to robustly bind to these receptors and boost the activity of this system. Cannabinoids also in immune cells, there's cannabinoids in bone metabolism, which there's lots of research, all kinds of systems, but the neurochemical, neuroscientific angle was the first big sort of understanding of what cannabinoids were doing.
Well, we make our own cannabinoids. In the plant, they're called phytocannabinoids. In our brain, they're called endocannabinoids. And we have 2 critical endocannabinoids, 2-AG and anandamide. 2-AG functionally is almost identical to CBD, but more importantly, same function. It's very interesting because when you're treating people with estrogen deficiencies, adrenal deficiencies, thyroid deficiencies, whatever, we all understand that one of the issues is when you take external or exogenous medication that we produce internally, it's like a thermostat. So we stop making it, which has consequences at times. And it's not that it's the end of the world, and mostly with endocrinology you can handle that, but CBD, and there may be other molecules that do this, I just don't know of any, is actually causing the release and the balance of our own internal cannabinoids, which is remarkable.
The endocannabinoid system really is a very integrative system of homeostasis that seems to act on just about every physiological system we know to promote the well-being of the whole organism.
As recently as 1937, cannabis tinctures were commonly used by doctors in the US and were an integral part of the pharmacopoeia. So what happened? How did this plant-based medicine become prohibited and criminalized? Let's go back to scholar and cancer patient Patricia Crone as she investigates the behind-the-scenes agenda that resulted in cannabis becoming illegal.
My problems getting cannabis really started in April 1937, when Congress proposed a heavy tax to make it unobtainable. Cannabis-based medicines were already losing out to regulation and modern standardized drugs. But still, the tax was fiercely opposed by the American Medical Association.
They sent their chief of their legislative council, a doctor and a lawyer, to Congress, and he said, yes, there are other drugs that can substitute for some of its indications, but that it would remove a valuable medicine from the doctor's black bag. And they also went on to say that there's future uses that we will probably discover that will be foreclosed. Unfortunately, the law was passed, but the American Medical Association was on record saying that they opposed this position, that it had medical uses.
And that was back in
1937.
And that's really when the drug war started.
Okay, DuPont, we're all familiar with DuPont. What did they do in the 1930s? They had patented a process for developing plastic, rayon, Dacron, nylon, all these different fabrics from oil. Now, the cannabis plant, the hemp plant, was also, you could also make fibers from the hemp plant. This was a huge competition with DuPont's patent on the use of oil, petrochemicals, to produce these fabrics. Andrew Mellon, DuPont's chief investor, Secretary of the Treasury, his nephew-in-law was named Harry Anslinger. Harry Anslinger was appointed by the president at that time to be the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which later became the Drug Enforcement Agency.
The Treasury Department intends to pursue a relentless warfare against the despicable, dope-peddling vulture who preys on the weakness of his fellow man.
Harry Anslinger was the leader of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, BNDD, for the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Now, Anslinger was behind the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, the federal prohibition that became federal marijuana law for the mid-century. Yeah, he was overzealous with marijuana, but there was ignorance at the time as to what the drug was, why it produced the reactions that it produced. From ignorance comes hysteria.
The hysteria didn't start with Harry Anslinger. Well, Harry Anslinger, originally his interest was in hard drugs, heroin and morphine and stuff. He was not interested in marijuana. Then you get all these nasty lay groups. They eagerly took up the battle against marijuana, the new menace to America's school children. And eventually Anslinger started this scaremongering campaign. Marijuana, assassin of youth. The killer was a narcotic known to America as marijuana. The article inspired the famous exploitation movie. There was this idea that people would smoke hash, then they were transformed into homicidal maniacs. And marijuana was a recipe for insanity, as he said.
Harry Anslinger thought it was a horrible, evil thing, and whatever they could do to convince people not to use it was fine with him.
Harry Anslinger's scare tactics worked. Marijuana, the menace, won out over marijuana, the medicine. Already by 1942, cannabis was out of the American pharmacopoeia. Cannabis had lost all connection to medicine and was now only a dangerous drug.
In 1970, Congress overhauled our federal drug laws and created the Controlled Substances Act. And the idea was that some drugs had a potential for abuse, and therefore they needed to be controlled. The amount of regulation was going to be based on how dangerous the drug was. Now, in that regulatory frame, there are 5 schedules. Schedule 1 is the most restrictive. That's for drugs with no medical use and the highest potential for abuse. And so heroin, for example, is a Schedule 1 drug. So the Nixon administration sends Congress a letter, and they said, we understand that marijuana doesn't really fit in Schedule 1, probably doesn't even fit in Schedule 2, because it lacks the high potential for abuse. But we want you to put it in Schedule 1 now For the time being, then Congress should reschedule it, or the administration should reschedule it, but no one ever did.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
The recommendation of the Commission in its first report is that we do not feel that private use or private possession in one's own home should have the stigma of criminalization.
So Nixon called in the chairman of the commission into his White House Oval Office, and this conversation was caught on the Nixon tapes.
We want to depathologize marijuana, but if they get the idea of just a bunch of do-gooders that are going to come out with a, quote, soft on marijuana report, that'll destroy it right off the bat.
You can hear him tell Schaefer that they had better not come out with a report that's soft on marijuana.
Now, that doesn't mean you come out with a report that is totally oblivious to some obvious differences between marijuana and other drugs, other dangerous drugs.
Make sure you confuse marijuana with other drugs, other dangerous drugs. I'm quoting Nixon now.
The cynicism is amazing.
It was an incredible, there was no respect for any kind of, science-based thorough study.
Here's something else that's interesting about being a Schedule I. According to the Drug Enforcement Agency, to be a Schedule I narcotic, the substance can't have any known medical uses, okay? No known medical uses. Okay, that's the definition of a Schedule I. Cannabis is a Schedule I. But if you go to the American Cancer Society's website, they've got 6 or 8 known medical uses for cannabis. If you go even further, you'll find out that the Department of Health and Human Services have a patent on the medical uses of cannabis.
How could it be that our own government, who denounced the plant as having no medical value, also holds a patent on the plant for its medical properties? If you find this confusing and hypocritical, you are not alone. What is it that the government understands about this plant? Are they protecting us from the sacred plant, or does this plant need to be protected from the onset of lies that has prohibited its medical use? Let's go back to Patricia Crone, who's in Washington, D.C., to see if she's uncovered any answers about this potential cover-up and disinformation war.
I got the patent right here. Here I am in Washington, NIH. More than 80 Nobel Prizes have gone to scientists doing research funded by this institute. And one of those scientists who worked right here and who got a Nobel Prize was Julius Axelrod, who specialized in neurotransmitters, in how cells talk to each other. And late in life, he participated in a study of cannabis that the government deemed to be so significant, so important, that it took out a patent on the findings. It says in its abstract that cannabinoids are found to have particular application as neuroprotectants in limiting neurological damage following ischemic insults such as stroke and trauma, or in the treatment of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and HIV dementia. And it has more about how it's good for people who have undergone cancer chemotherapy or radiation and other sources of oxidative stress. We have here, which seems, an official recognition by the US government that cannabis has medical uses.
Federal patent number was that?
That was 6,630,507 B1. But if you go to cannabisinternational.org, it's the first patent on the patent page. You can download it. It is 29 pages, but it's really worth reading several times because it's very informative. It tells you what an antioxidant is, what reactive oxygen species are. It has a list of oxidative associated diseases that includes things as divergent as Down syndrome and cancer, as well as autoimmune disorders, inflammatory conditions, heart attacks, strokes, Alzheimer's, diabetes. And so these are the conditions listed, and it talks about the dose that you need in these areas. And an interesting activity is to highlight prevention, and prophylaxis is just another scientific term for prevention, because it's an amazing the number of times that this patent refers to the capacity of cannabidiol to prevent conditions.
It's right on the patent page. That to me is I mean, it's painful on so many levels. I mean, one, we're putting people in jail while people are patenting this stuff, the same people. And also, as a physician now, for a year and a half, a year and 3/4, seeing what CBD and really quality medicine, dose medicine does for people, I'm furious.
And my understanding is that they're leasing that patent to pharmaceutical companies, and it's pretty clear that the pharmaceutical industry, a major component of the healthcare industry, which has been estimated at about $2.6 trillion, if there's value here, that needs to be the domain of the pharmaceutical industry. And I believe that they're interested in acquiring financial rights to whatever value is there. And particularly if you start seeing some of these very dramatic results where you have kids that are making tumors kind of evaporate, that definitely is the kind of thing that the trans-globals are going to want a big chunk of.
There's a patent out there that the government owns that says that they own the idea of using cannabinoids to protect the brain, so somebody could come back and sue them. So as they're developing their ideas, they say, well, their lawyers or somebody said, you better go and get a sub-license from that patent, so in the future, nobody's going to come and say that you can't, you couldn't earn this application. So that's what that's about. It's a game of protecting your future investment, for your investors. But I mean, the idea that the U.S. government owns the idea of chemicals from this plant, which is unsafe for medical use officially, as so safe to be given to people who have had major strokes to protect their brains, just shows you how far away we are from the essential fact of the matter that this plant is useful for these things.
The medical establishment decided long ago that they could not maximize their profits if the people have access to this sacred plant. If the people have access to this natural medicine, they wouldn't need all of these prescription pharmaceuticals for painkillers and Alzheimer's and all of these other conditions that the sacred plant can help address. So we have been denied access to that as a deliberate strategy to enrich the profits of powerful corporations that are, in essence, enslaving humanity by depriving us of access to the natural solutions that have been made available to us by Mother Nature.
Yes, it is confusing. Why does the U.S. government, the United States government, own a patent on the medical benefits of this plant called cannabis? Why do they own a patent? Why would you even waste your time and money in purchasing a patent in something you don't even believe in? In 2013, CNN's chief health correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, acknowledged this hypocrisy and apologized to the American people for misleading them about cannabis. Gupta's public reversal and apology helped usher in a new phase of legitimacy for the sacred plant.
So there's a sea change occurring in the mainstream media. Even Sanjay Gupta, who at one point was very much against the medicinal use of cannabis, has changed his mind, and it did an entire documentary revealing that it should be considered an essential part of treating a lot of refractory conditions, from epileptic seizures to even certain types of cancer. So we're seeing now the medical establishment coming around, acknowledging that because ultimately medicine's goal is to reduce human suffering, we can't ignore this plant any longer. It is the answer that so many people have been looking for.
Without question, Sanjay Gupta has had a tremendous impact on the medical cannabis issue. He said, America has been terribly and systematically misled for 70 years. That even saying that to you now gives me goosebumps again. When he said that, I just about fell off my chair, because it's absolutely right, and it's what we need to start hearing from federal officials. We need more people with the authority and the standing of the Sanjay Gupta to come forward and say, it's time for a change, and a big change. It's not a simple matter of rescheduling.
This brings me to another interesting fact that I want to share with you. The federal government has been legally providing medical cannabis for a handful of patients for many years now. Yes, I know that given everything we've just shared with you about the government's position on cannabis, this is very hard to believe, but it is true. Ervin Rosenfelt receives a monthly supply of cannabis cigarettes from the federal government's cannabis garden at the University of Mississippi. Ervin is one of the few living patients who still receives his legal cannabis today. Alice Hilary's husband, Bob Randall, also received medical cannabis directly from the federal government. Alice and Bob challenged the U.S. government in court for years to get access to the plant for his glaucoma. Let's meet Erwin and Alice and hear their stories.
My name is Alice O'Leary Randall, and I have been called the First Lady of Medical Marijuana. And the reason for that is that my late husband, Robert Randall, is the acknowledged founder of the medical marijuana movement in America. Robert was a glaucoma patient. He was diagnosed at a very young age, at 24, and was told he'd be blind by the time he was 30. And he accidentally discovered that marijuana seemed to help his vision. And through a period of trial and error, he proved it to himself, then he proved it to me. And we did what we could to keep ourselves in supply. But there were periods of drought, and that's when we really knew that it was helping him. August 1975, we were arrested for cultivating marijuana in Washington, D.C. We thought we were the only ones in the universe who knew that marijuana had medical use. We had told nobody else. We did no research on it. We just knew it was helping Robert. But within a few weeks of getting arrested, we did some research and discovered that it had a very long and distinguished history. And more importantly, we found out there was a study going on at UCLA that we were able to get Robert into. And that study proved without a shadow of a doubt that marijuana was the ingredient when added to his regular medications. That was the one that was lowering his eye pressure into the safe range. And on that basis, we were able to build a court case and beat the charges against us on the basis of medical necessity. Robert also petitioned the federal government for permission to use their supplies of marijuana. And they said, yeah, we'll give them to you, but you can't talk about it. Well, Robert was a graduate with a degree in debate and a master's degree in rhetoric, and there was no way he was going to be quiet about it. So he got his supplies, immediately started talking about it, and it became big news. And started getting calls right away from other patients, and bit by bit, the movement was born. The government grows a 5-acre plot at the University of Mississippi, and they claim that they've been doing that from the 70s, maybe late 60s, to facilitate basic physiological research with respect to marijuana. So they grow it there, they ship it to the Research Triangle Institute in North Carolina, where it's rolled into cigarettes. At one time in this country, there were 34 state laws between 1978 and 1981. 34 states enacted laws which recognized marijuana's medical value and sought to establish statewide programs of research using federal supplies of marijuana. Now, we thought this was great. This was going to end the question, does marijuana have medical value? And it's going the proper route, because we were told it had to be the proper route. Well, turns out the federal government really didn't want to let these states have their supplies of marijuana. I don't think they really wanted the question answered. I still don't think they want the question answered. The AIDS crisis really accelerated the interest in medical marijuana because it was so useful to AIDS patients, primarily and most visually as an appetite stimulant. However, AIDS patients kept telling us, it's doing something more, it's doing something more. I still think it was stimulating their immune system, and I think it was helping them tremendously. And so at one time, we were able to get the number of people receiving federal marijuana up to 15. But then the federal government decided that was enough compassion, and they shut that program down. There was huge public outrage that the federal government would shut down the only means where critically ill people could get access to marijuana. And the government totally underestimated the anger that would come about as a result of that closure. You know, they had a chance to control this. The federal government could have controlled this. But they were very, very stupid and very cruel, as they still are, frankly, when it comes to medical marijuana. So.
I was the second patient in the United States to receive medical cannabis from the United States federal government. My protocol started November 20th, 1982. So I've been getting 10 cigarettes per day for almost 33 years. Adequate. Government weed is adequate. I'm not going to say it's top notch because it's not, but it works, and that's all I care about. I have a severe bone tumor disorder, so it serves as a muscle relaxant, anti-inflammatory for pain, and it's kept the tumors from growing. And I don't get high off any cannabis, so it really doesn't matter. I mean, if it was better quality, I might be able to ingest less, instead of 10 a day. But at least it works, and I'm thankful to have it. This is the history of me taking on the 10-year struggle of taking on the federal government and being one of only a few handful of people in this country that can travel with a Schedule I drug and not be arrested. So there's a lot of things in this book that people wouldn't know about if I didn't write it. And that was the importance of Bob Randall's book. And Bob finished writing the book right before he died in 2001. So I figured I didn't want that to happen to me. If I didn't have my medicine, I would not be alive today. I'm sure of it. And if I were alive, most likely I'd be on homebound and on disability. So I'd be a drain on society versus a productive member of society. It's definitely ironic that here the federal government's been putting people in jail for the last 33 years, even before that, be giving me this tin can of marijuana every 25 to 30 days. So yeah, it's an irony that I get to use it legally and not a problem with society and other people. It's a problem for everybody else in the country. That's why we need to lock up everybody else that uses it. But for me and one other person, it's okay. That just doesn't make it.
There's a lot of information we covered in our first episode. These truths that we've shared are fundamental in the rest of our journey over the next 6 episodes. You've seen the heartbreaking truth behind how the cannabis plant went from being an accepted medicine to an illegal street drug. I hope that this side of the history equation helps you understand the foundation of why things are the way they are. You've seen the proof that deception, greed, and fear have been tools employed to leave the people confused and afraid rather than empowered. Over the next 6 episodes, we'll demystify the confusion surrounding this medicine and meet more patients whose lives have been saved or dramatically improved by having access to this sacred plant. We aren't sure how long this information will be available because there are people who don't want it to get out there. So please help us by clicking the link below to share these episodes widely.
Under the corruption of the pharmaceutical industry, humanity has only become more sick, more demented, with more cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, brain disorders, psychiatric disorders, a lower quality of life, and less awareness and awakening. And it's because we've been deprived access to these natural medicines, these incredible molecules in the natural world that really make so much of chemical medicine obsolete.
The biggest problem I see in the medical industry is that patients are made to be powerless. And that's not true, because 90% of the diseases in the Western world are Western diseases. That means they're caused by our diet, lifestyle, and environment. And when you realize that, you should also realize that your choices matter. And that's my message. That's the most important message, I think, of the whole series, is that our choices determine our future.
I think Western medicine has taken our power for healing ourselves away from us. It's disempowering. It makes you think that you must go to a doctor or you must take this prescription medication to heal. And I think that's because that's what the industry wants you to think. So that no matter what, whenever you're feeling an ache, you go to them and your money then transfers to them as well. The beauty of these plants is that it's very empowering. You know, you could just grow one of these plants in your backyard naturally, for free, almost for free, and heal yourself. It drove me crazy as a journalist to go and see so many people suffering. And to know that these people are sitting there suffering day in and day out and being denied access or even a choice as to whether or not to consume these medicines is horrific. And that's costing us lives. And I think it's a human rights tragedy.
I'm really excited about sharing this next episode with you. In episode number 2, How It Fights Disease in Your Body, we'll learn about the secrets of the endocannabinoid system. This is the internal system in our bodies that plays a role in almost all diseases. We'll explain why the discovery of the endogenous system that produces our own internal cannabinoids was a game changer for researchers. We are also going to talk about one of the most deadly plagues in the world today, the opioid epidemic. There are currently nearly 100 deaths a day from opioid overdoses. What if I told you that this sacred plant could totally reverse those statistics? We'll meet patients whose lives were destroyed by opioid pain medications until they discovered cannabis. These patients include NFL players and celebrated physicists. You'll be amazed to see how they learned to control their pain and reclaim their lives with cannabis. We will also check in with stage 4 lung cancer patient Patricia Crone to see if she was able to find a source for cannabis to treat her advanced cancer. You will also learn some vital truth in this upcoming episode, so make sure you don't miss a single moment of it.
Our world today is stricken by so much sickness and suffering, but much of it isn't necessary, and by supporting this documentary series and watching it and sharing it with others, you may be able to help save your own life or even enhance or protect the lives of others whom you love and know, people who need to be awakened, who need to have access to this amazing information.
I really hope you'll tune in to watch the Sacred Plant series. This information is so important, so powerful, and can have a significant impact on you or someone that you care about. So tune in, don't miss this.
Did you enjoy episode 1? Did you learn something new that will better empower you to help yourself and your loved ones? If so, we need your help. There are millions of people all around the world right now who are suffering that need this vital information. For many, it can be a matter of life and death. Please spread the word by sharing this series on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites by clicking the links below. Your support will make a huge difference on how many people we reach and ultimately how many lives are saved. Thank you in advance for clicking the links below to help educate and empower more people.